Hello everyone, it's Phil here from One-to-One IELTS. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at how to approach a multiple graph question for the academic task 1 part of the exam. I'll be looking at how to plan one of these essays, how to analyze the question with my students. Then we're going to work out how to identify the key features of a multiple graph question. After that, we'll have a look at the structure for one of these questions. We'll have a quick look at how to group the data. Then we'll have a look at paraphrasing the question and writing the overview. So the question that we're going to look at is this one here. We can see we have got one graph here, one graph here. The question says the line graph below shows visits to and from the UK from 1979 to 1999. And the bar graph shows the most popular countries visited by UK residents in 1999. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. First message I get in my chat is, oh, difficult. I think after today, you're going to realize this is not, oh, difficult. And so I want you to be thinking, oh, easy. If you get a graph like this, they do actually tend to be a little bit easier than single graphs because the graphs themselves are not going to be as complicated, because if you have two of them, they can't give you really complicated graphs because you would have too much to talk about. So the graphs tend to be a little bit simpler, but we'll break it down. We'll go through the question analysis and make sure that we fully understand it. And then once we've done that, we'll go about looking at what are the key features, and then next week we're going to go into the details paragraphs. So first step is going to be question analysis. So we're going to think, what type of chart or graph have we got? So obviously here we've got two. The second one is a bar chart, and the first one is a line graph. Now we've got to decide, as always, one of the very, very important things, are we comparing, contrasting? Are we looking at trends over time, or are we doing both? So let's try and do this one graph at a time. So the first graph, what is the first graph interested in? We care about trends over time. Okay, so there's no compare and contrast here. We're really focusing a lot more on trends over time. Trends. Now our bar chart, it's comparing and contrasting. There's nothing over time here. So this is purely compare and contrast. How many categories? So again, let's look at it one by one. The line graph has 2, and the bar chart has 5 countries. Okay, so line. Verb tenses. The first thing we're going to look for, have we got a date on this? Okay, so we've got a number of dates up to 1999, and this one is also 1999. So all of these dates are past. They're all completed actions in the past. So we're going to use the past simple. Do I need to use passive voice? Bar charts, line graphs, we don't have to worry about passive voice. Passive voice is being used for process questions and for map questions. So nope. Unit of measurement. So what is our unit of measurement on the line graph? So millions of what? Be careful here. So Maitreya said millions of people. Damara said visitors. Let's have a look at our key that we've got here. Visits abroad by UK residents. So what is a visit? What is another word for visit? A trip. So we could either say trips abroad by UK residents, visits abroad. Are we talking about the people, or are we talking about the trip? Trips. So we don't want to mention, 40 million people, because that means all of our data will be wrong. So it's really important to analyze our key here, and it's talking about visits. If you're not sure of another word for visit, we use the word visit. This is super, super important. Do not paraphrase what is in keys or like the units of measurement unless you are 1000% sure. So for me, I know that a visit and a trip is a synonym. They are direct synonyms. That's absolutely fine. I can use that. If I didn't know that, if I looked at it and just thought, visits abroad, I'm not sure, maybe that's trips. Never take the risk. Because if you change this word, this visits abroad, to a different word, and it's not the same, it doesn't just hurt your vocabulary score, but it's going to mean that you're either going to get a band 5 or a band 6 for your task response. Even if you write a perfect essay and you just put the wrong word in, you're not getting over about 5 or about 6 for task response. So it's super important. We do not look for synonyms for words in here unless we are completely sure. I cannot stress that enough. Really, really important. Visits abroad, millions. And then the bar. What is our unit of measurement? Here again, we've got millions. It's not visits this time. This time it is UK visitors. Visitors that come from the UK. Was there a key? Yep, that was a key. We've already had to have a look at the key to analyze our units of measurement. Always check the key, see what it's talking about here. Okay, now we have analyzed the question. What do we need to do next? Now we want to identify what the key features are of these graphs. And I think this is what confuses a lot of people, these key features. Oh, I've got 2 graphs, there's so many key features. Now, especially these 2 graphs. These 2 graphs are incredibly simple. We're going to break them down like you do normally by this part here. It's all about the purpose. Your key feature is going to come about because of the purpose of the chart. So we said line graph has trends, bar graph is compare and contrast. Let's look at line graph and trends. What will we say here for our trends? Things we have here, we've got visits abroad by UK residents and visits to the UK by overseas residents. And Gabby asked, do we need 2 key features for each graph? That's really going to depend on your graph. Sometimes you're going to find that you'll have one graph which is more complicated and one graph which is really simple. In that instance, you might want 3 key features for the complicated graph and just 1 key feature for the simple graph. But what we're basically going to do is we're going to look at what could be key features. We're going to list them all out. If they're under 4 key features, then it doesn't matter. Then we've got our key features. If there's too many, we're going to look at the key features that we don't need, which are less important, and we'll get rid of a few. Let's look at this one first. Tamara said all increased. All we're thinking about for something over time is, does it increase, decrease, fluctuate, or remain stable? For this graph, and there's not really much else to say. I would actually, when I'm looking at this, going, okay, well, everything's increasing. Well, that's not a lot of key features. Are there any other key features I could maybe mention about this graph? So once we've looked at increase, decrease, and if everything's increasing, what else could we look at? We could do a quick compare and contrast. So thinking about high or low. This line is always above this line. So the visits abroad, there were more visits abroad than visits to. All increased. And the only reason I'm thinking about high or low here is because we literally had 1 key feature before. There was 1 key feature of everything increased. Let's put this extra feature in, and now let's move on, because we certainly can't find anything else in here. So we've got a bar chart. When we have a bar chart, it's a visual representation of data. What jumps out at you? Let your eyes help you. What looks different to everything else here? Andrea said France and Gabby says France and Spain. One of these I really like. Going back to what I said, let your eyes help you. Don't let your brain take over by going, oh, it's got to be the highest, it's got to be the lowest. What do your eyes tell you? What jumps out? Both. Definitely, if I look at this, by far the highest bar charts are France and Spain. So we're not just going to say, oh, France is the highest and go into automatic. My teacher told me to look for the highest and the lowest. If you looked at this graph, do your eyes go to Turkey? Do you go, oh, Turkey looks interesting? Or do your eyes just look at France and Spain? For me, my eyes just look at France and Spain. I'm like, okay, we've got two really big numbers here, and everything else is kind of the same. Your key features need to be between 2 and 4. Is 3 between 2 and 4? Yeah, between 2 and 4, absolutely fine. Don't panic. Sometimes you only have 2. That's fine. If you've got 2, you've got 2. This is the range of key features you need. If there's nothing else that jumps out at you, it's not a key feature. But that's why I'm saying, let your eyes help you. And then we continue like normal. We've identified key features. What is our next step? Let's move on and have a look at the structure for one of these essay types. Always 4 paragraphs, introduction, overview. Multiple graphs. If we've got two graphs, it should be super easy. How are we going to group this? What is the logical way to group two graphs into two detailed paragraphs? Exactly. We just divide it into one detailed paragraph for one graph, one detailed paragraph for the other. Which order are we going to write our paragraphs in? Because this, again, we want to be as logical as possible. Do we do the line graph first or the bar graph first? First one is going to be the line graph because it's the first thing in the question. So we just go in the same order as the question, and that is logical. Detailed paragraph 1, line. Detailed paragraph 2, bar. It couldn't get easier. For grouping, which is something, some people already struggle with, because you've got to go, oh, which key features are going to go in which. You've got two graphs, you're laughing with this type of question, because it's really easy to group, but that's one less thing that you have to worry about. Now we're ready to write. So the first part of writing is... Our next step now is paraphrasing the question statement. So let's have a look at our question. Obviously, if we've got two graphs, the paraphrase is going to be a little bit longer. That said, we're still going to go about our paraphrasing technique. What should be the first thing we think about when paraphrasing? So if we can, change sentence structure. And then after we've changed sentence structure, then we can have a look at synonyms. I would keep this in order, however. We are talking, it still makes sense to talk about the line graph first and the bar graph second. Let's see if we can change anything. We're definitely going to want to have this, the line graph shows, so we know what we're talking about. How do we paraphrase the line graph? Line chart illustrates. Do we ever need to include this word below? No. Okay, this is a word that's never going to be in our paraphrase. Visits to and from the UK from 1979 to 1999. Is there any way that we can change the structure here? I would say it would be difficult to find a different structure and a difficult to find structure. So if we don't see an easy way of changing the structure, then we go to synonyms. Visits, we mentioned already. Trips, to and from the UK, to and from the United Kingdom. Yep, we can make it larger. Instead of the United Kingdom, could I write England? No, do not make this mistake. The United Kingdom is made up of more than England. So this would not be an accurate paraphrase. So just simply write it out in full. And then from 1979 to 1999, instead of from and to, we can use between and. And then moving on to our next one. And the bar chart shows the most popular countries visited by UK residents. So at the moment, this is all one sentence. How could we maybe change this? How could we replace this comma and? So yeah, we could show contrast. So we could have comma while, we could have a full stop, or even more interesting, a semicolon could replace a comma and. This is a structure we could use. Or you can just show contrast and you can have while, which would also be fine. So let's go for while. It looks interesting. The bar graph, the bar chart, yeah, shows, Damaris said depicts, yeah. Let's try and use a different word to what we had here. The most popular countries visited by UK residents. Could we change the structure here, maybe? Oh, Tamara said the most famous nations. Be very careful of this. Popular and famous are not synonyms, and many people make this mistake. Famous means well-known. Popular means people like it. They're very, very different. So do not use famous as a synonym for popular. I was trying to think maybe we could say, so the countries that were visited the most, that I've basically created a relative clause here. I talked about the countries, and then we used a relative clause to describe these countries. I'm just copying the whole thing, and then we'll have a look at synonyms. By doing this, I've changed the sentence structure. And now I've changed the sentence structure. Let's go back and look at common synonyms. So countries, common synonym for country, nations that were visited. So that were visited the most. We've already, by changing the sentence structure, we don't need to change anything here. UK residents, how can I reword this? Think about, can you change the sentence structure, Mary? So rather than just looking at, okay, UK residents, and UK residents and UK citizens are not actually exactly the same, because we're not all residents are citizens of the UK. People living in the UK, yeah. So again, we're going to the idea of changing sentence structure rather than looking for synonyms. In 1999 is in 1999. Cannot really be changed. So by doing it this way, we did quite a lot of structure changing. So the first one we looked at, we said, okay, we can't really change the structure. So if you can't change the structure, don't worry about it. But if it is possible to change structure, that should be the first thing in your mind while paraphrasing. And then after the structure is changed, then you look at easy words to paraphrase, like nations, bar chart, UK residents, people living in the UK. So it's often quite good for paraphrasing to think about how do you describe something. So if you look at this UK residents, if I said to you, what is a UK resident? You say, well, it's a person who lives in the UK. By explaining what a term means, you have paraphrased it. The last step that we're going to look at today is writing the overview. So we've got 3 key features. We've got line graph, we're looking at the trends, and the bar graph. One sentence at a time, or one section at a time. So how would you describe the information here? So the line graph first, and I'm going to throw this over to my students. So we're talking about visits to and from the UK. So this and this both increased. So the information in our key both increased. And this line was higher than this line. So those 2 pieces of information I want in a sentence. Don't worry about the bar chart yet. Bar chart is going to be in a different sentence. So we just do this one step at a time. So over to you guys in the chat. If you're watching this at home, try this at home as well. How would you describe these 2 key trends? Everything increased and then more visits abroad. When doing this, you can also use the title of this graph is going to be useful for you. So overall, the figures for people who visited UK, remember we refer to the UK and UK residents. Here we don't need to have the because UK is being used as an adjective. But when the UK is being used as a noun, as the actual place itself, we need the article. The figures for people who visited the UK and UK residents who traveled abroad increased. This is addressing one, but it's not addressing the other. But it's very, very well worded. So I'm actually going to keep this. But for whoever wrote this, can you add the second part? Okay, looking at the next one. Overall, both categories increased during the whole period. Visits abroad by people living in the United Kingdom. So I think they have no articles here. Visits abroad by people living in the United Kingdom were higher than visits to the UK by overseas residents. So this definitely covers both. So let's start having a look at the language then. Overall, both categories increased during the whole period. What is our problem here? Yeah, we should name them. At the moment, this is too vague because if I said both categories, so I'm meant to be giving an overview for all of this. So we have, sure, 2 categories for the line graph, but we've got 5 categories here. So overall, there's 7 categories. So if I just say there's 2 categories, I'm lost. So you could maybe say in the line graph, both categories increased. That would be a little bit better. But I think we can just simply say overall, both trips to and from UK increased. And here, this expression here, when we rather than saying increased during, there's a much better preposition than during, a more natural preposition than during. Yeah, over is the one you're looking for. So we're going to use this a lot in our academic task 1. So both trips to and from the UK increased over the whole period. Excellent. Okay, so that's very clear what we're referring to. Visits abroad by people living in the United Kingdom were higher than visits to the UK. It's a little bit strange to say a visit was higher. What would be a more common way when comparing these? The number of visits abroad by people living in the United Kingdom were higher, because we're talking about the number, was higher than the number of visits to the UK by overseas residents. So we can definitely, a number can be higher than another number. So this works. This is a collocation. I'm going to show you a different way that we can do this. So instead of saying the number of visits, we can say visits abroad by people living in the United Kingdom than visits to the UK by overseas residents. So we use there are more than. This is a very common comparative structure. Now what we have to do is look at the bar graph. France and Spain, the highest. Again, we can look at the title to give us an idea of what language to use here. The countries that were visited the most by people living in the UK were France and Spain. Excellent. Well done there, Gabby. No problems with this. Whereas France and Spain were the highest for the most popular nations visited by UK residents. I was assuming someone was going to get confused of how to talk about this. We are trying to refer to popularity. So we're not going to use this were highest. we're going to use the most popular, but we're going to show, we're talking about two things here. Whereas France and Spain were the two most popular nations visited by UK residents. This is how we do it. The two most popular nations. So it's nice and simple. If I wanted to talk about Spain, so France is obviously the most popular nation. How would I talk about Spain? Second, yeah. So we just use these first, second, third with our superlative structures here. France is the most popular, Spain is the second most popular. So these are ways of expressing ourselves using superlatives. Now let's have a look at how we're going to join these together. So it is possible we could just add them like this. Or the other way is, as Mary has indicated she would do here, and make this a big complex sentence, and we can have this. So overall, the figures for people who visited the UK and UK residents who travelled abroad increased, while the latter category was the highest over the period, whereas France and Spain were the two most popular nations visited by UK residents. Excellent. Overall, the visits to and from the UK went up over the period, and the latter was the highest over the period. Countries that were visited the most by people living in the UK were France and Spain. So here, if we wanted to, just to make this a slightly more complicated grammatical structure, we have this. Looking at this very first part, we've got two parts that say over the period and over the period. Is there any way we could make this a little bit more concise and be less repetitive, and maybe only mention over the period once? So what I could do is just use one of these at the beginning. So overall, over the period, the visits to and from the UK went up, and the latter was the highest. So this over the period now covers both of these, and we're a lot less repetitive. Were these visits the most over the period? So here we had a period, but here, could we be a bit more precise? Because this isn't over the whole period, this is only 1999. So yeah, let's come back. And again, I feel it would be good to mention this is not over the whole period, but we're just going to make it very clear that this final part is only referring to 1999, and the first part was referring to the whole period. And then we have two options here, really nice, really concise, covering all of the key features for our overview. Next week, we're going to focus on details paragraphs, and we will have a look at the language that we want to use to talk about line graphs, which increase over time or go over time, and for bar charts, so some compare and contrast language. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments or join our Facebook group. Thank you to my students who helped us out today. Good luck to everyone in their studies, and I hope you're able to use this in your essays. Next week, we'll go on to have a look at how to write the details paragraph for one of these multiple graph questions.